festive evening
Asher, what's your name?
and would get home quite late, always past my bedtime,
Falcon.
considerably past. And the Christmas tree was up,
I'm making
but just the tree, not decorated. And Christmas morning, of course, even though you go to bed late, you get up early on Christmas morning,
Yeah.
all excited, and the tree would be decorated, and Santa would have had his milk and cookies. And I think back on that, to think what my mom and dad would go through.
Well, decorating the tree, not only, yeah, for sure.
And I was talking to my sister very recently. We had a long telephone conversation. She called, and we had a high old time, and I asked her if she remembered that. I don't know the year that she was born. I'd have to look it up, but there's got to be, I would think, 6 or 7 years spread in our ages. It could be as much as 10. I'll have to look it up on it. And she didn't remember that at all. So I figure, well, I don't remember this. I remember what I told you, but I don't remember what the transition. Santa no longer did it because she had no recollection of that. So
Were these in Chicago or Indiana?
yeah, Chicago.
Yeah.
We lived very close to each other. My grandparents. It was a walking distance. I've been wanting to go back to that neighborhood and check all the things. The first house that I lived in, and I don't remember exactly because my parents lived in an apartment, and whether they moved when I was born into a house that they rented, or
practically everything. I think
whether they had already moved into the house, probably during my mom's pregnancy and there. But I remember that house, 106th Street, and it was a dead-end street because railroad tracks were at the end of the street. So it was a
What, just
Dead
ran
end.
into the rail yard or something?
Huh?
Ran into the rail yard?
I don't know what the train was, but no, there wasn't a railroad yard near there because I can remember they had a kind of wooden fence structure at the end of the street. As I remember, it was painted white with black stripes or something like that. But we used to sit on that and watch the trains go by, and they were going at full speed. It wasn't a slow movement. One of the big things that we had during the summer, we didn't have a garden at the house at all, but the area beyond there, I don't know exactly where it started, but a few blocks the other side of the tracks, there were houses along all the, but then it was a big open area, and this was during, I guess, the war had started. And in fact, I remember vividly, one of my very vivid childhood memories is the day that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I didn't know really what was going on or anything, but I remember I could see exactly what the light was outdoors and everything, and people were just all our neighbors and so forth were out and carrying on with it. But they had victory gardens, and my parents had a plot for their victory garden and would go out and work in the garden. And tomatoes were a big thing. And I can remember me and my friends would sit on that railroad fence eating tomatoes. And it's a real cool thing to carry a salt shaker around in your pocket. So that's another memory I have, is sitting, eating tomato, watching the trains go by. Of course, that was a big no-no. You do not go by the railroad track. But that was at the end of the street, and I recall the railroad tracks were slightly elevated. On
What was your grandma and grandpa Hine like?
oh, they were great. I didn't realize this at the time, but I was born when it was just recovering from the Depression. I can remember my dad had an extra job. His boss he worked for the American Gut String Manufacturing Company, and his boss owned a bunch of apartments. And one of the confusing things to me is I don't remember when we actually got a car. And I would think that's something that would be very much a live memory. That I have a lot of memories, like things I'm talking about now, when I must have been Escher's age and even younger then. But I can remember sitting in the back seat of the car, my mom and my dad would go and collect the rents, and it was always like nighttime sort of thing after his job, or maybe weekend, I don't know, but I can remember it being dark outside and sitting in the car talking with my mom, hearing on while my dad went and collected rents. Why do you think at that time the idea of someone going around knocking on doors and collecting the rent seems kind of weird? But things change in our lives. We're seeing dramatic change in our time. The rate of change has accelerated so much. I used to think of the major changes that took place in my parents' life or in my grandparents' life, and I mean, you could count them on the fingers of one hand. But anyway, my grandfather had a like an as I remember it like an office supply store, and it was very close to some school. And he lost all of that in the Depression. And of course, this was before I was born. But what he did was in the basement, he had a workbench where he sat and worked, and I can remember sitting down in a chair next to him. I'd be sitting this way, and the workbench would be that way, and he would be working away, repairing typewriters. And that's the way he made a living. And my grandmother would bake zillions of loaves of bread. My mouth just started watering when I thought about her bread. That was something really special. Particularly would sit and eat it while it was still warm, when it came out of the oven. But she had a whole list of customers that every week would deliver bread to. And I have nothing but happy memories of all of this time, but when I think back on it, what the family was going through, and how the Depression hit them, and looking for money, but that was not ever communicated to me. All of this stuff was good.
Did your grandpa ever get his store back?
No.
He just repaired typewriters, and did he ever retire, or did he do that till he died?
I don't remember that. Yes, I mean, it must, but I'd have to talk to Glenn, get an update on things. I was 11 years old when we moved out of Chicago to the sand dunes. And the reason I remember that, I could have been 10, but just turned, I was probably a year away from being 12, because I remember my 12th birthday. And the reason I remember it is my dad, when we moved out to the dunes, started a Boy Scout troop, and he was the scoutmaster. And I couldn't become a Boy Scout until I turned 12. And that just killed me. I wanted to be part of it, because they'd go camping and do all kinds of neat things. And I couldn't join in. And then I became 12, and I became a member of the troop, and life went on. We'd move for the entire summer in a cottage by the lake, and my dad would commute into Chicago, and we were within commuting range. It was slightly less than an hour train ride. And when I took lessons at the Art Institute, oh no, that was before we moved. Well, whatever. But another one of my vivid memories is my parents coming home to the house we were then living in. We had moved from there, the house I was describing, a little bit further out, and in that area that was all just grass fields and all, they built new houses, and we got one of those houses that was out where the Victory Garden used to be. And that was the first house they owned. And I can remember them coming home one night. They had driven out to rent a cottage, and some hotshot real estate person must have gotten a hold of them, and they sold them a house instead of a cottage. And we moved. That became home. And a lot of the closeness of activities and things that were when we lived in Chicago weren't as active, because that was all walking distance range.
Was it still, was the neighborhood in Chicago still very Dutch?
Very what?
Dutch?
We lived in a area called Roseland, and the Roseland area was really a Dutch settlement. I got this book a number of years ago. It's written by some professor at the Northwestern University or something like that, on history of Chicago. And
Dutch Chicago?
yeah.
Yeah, I borrowed it from you.
Oh, okay.
I have it.
And boy, so many things clicked in when I read that book. That just part of my experience. I didn't realize it, but my dad was a rebel in the sense that he was the first one in the entire family to not marry a Dutch girl.
How did your grandma feel about that?
Well, I can only imagine, because the sense of family and all was all very, very close. It wasn't like she wasn't embraced by the entire family or all, but he was the first. So
I remember Grandma saying that your grandma was a little bit upset.
Oh, I'm sure.
Aha!
And I can remember then walking to school. We had to cross Halsted Street, which is a major artery there. And the police were on duty. It was the same couple of guys that were there every day when we went to school and coming back home to escort us across the street. And we became buddies, because you could see the same guy every day and kid around and what have you. And this one guy particularly, I don't remember his name or anything, but used to tease me and joke around and so forth. And one day I was coming home from school, and I was going straight to my grandmother's house rather than our house. And she lived, I don't know how many blocks
Dylan,
it
you want
was,
pancakes?
Well, sure.
Have to come and make them up yourself.
it was about probably a half a dozen blocks or so further. And the cop somehow we talked, and he said, "Wait, and I'll drive you there." And so that happened, and it scared the family to death when they saw the police car with me getting out of it. But it was all good fun. But the cop was somehow talking about the family and so forth, and
Yeah.
my grandmother's parents lived with them, and there was my aunt and my uncle Glenn were in fact Junior, other uncle, was still there too. I remember in the house. So 3 children, and then the grandparents, who pictures up on the wall there, Grandma and Grandpa Smith.
Agnes and Jacob.
And anyway, the cop, they spoke Dutch all the time to each other. When my grandmother and grandfather would be talking to them, they would speak in Dutch. And somehow this was all communicated to my policeman buddy, and he wanted to know if I'd like to learn some Dutch. And I said, yeah. And so he taught me some Dutch. And the Dutch he taught me was Gotten Himmel, which would be the Dutch version of goddamn. It's God in heaven. And I'm in the kitchen with my grandmother, and she's baking or cooking and all, and I can remember saying, "Gotten Himmel," and she swatted me, slapped me in the face, and I fell on the floor. Was made to sit on a chair. I didn't know what I was saying. I wanted to talk in Dutch with my grandmother.
Naughty policeman.
Oh.
Alright, pancakes time.